Fudge. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had always known that Hagrid had an unfortunate liking for large, monstrous creatures. During their first year at Hogwarts, he tried to raise a dragon in his little wooden house, and it would have been a long time before they forgot about the giant three-headed dog he christened Fluffy. And if, as a boy, Hagrid had heard that a monster was hiding somewhere in the castle, Harry was sure he'd have gone to any lengths to get a glimpse of it. He probably thought it was a shame that the monster had been cooped up so long, and thought it deserved a chance to stretch its many legs. Harry could just imagine the 13-year-old Hagrid trying to fit a leash or a collar on it, but he was equally certain that Hagrid would never have meant to kill anybody. Harry half wished he hadn't found out about Riddle's diary again, and Ron and Hermione made him recount what he had seen, until he heartily sick of telling him, sick, long, circular conversations that followed. Riddle? He might have gotten the wrong person, said Hermione. Maybe it was someone other monster that was attacking people. How many monsters do you think this place can hold? Ron said dully. He always knew Hagrid had been expelled, Harry said miserably, and the attacks must have stopped after Hagrid was kicked out. Otherwise, Riddle wouldn't have got his award. Ron tried a different tack. Riddle does sound a lot like Percy, who asked him to squeal on Hagrid anyway. But the monster had killed someone, Ron, said Hermione, and Riddle was going to go back to some muggle orphanage and close Hogwarts, said Harry. I don't blame him for wanting to stay here. You met Hagrid down in Knockturn Alley, didn't you, Harry? He was buying flesh-eating slug repellent, said Ron quickly. The three of them fell silent. After a long pause, Hermione voiced the naughtiest question of all in a hesitant voice. Do you think we should go and ask Hagrid about it at all? Oh, that'd be a cheerful visit, said Ron. Hello, Hagrid. Tell us how you've been setting anything mad on Harry loose in the castle lately. In the end, they decided they would not say anything to Hagrid unless there was another attack. And as more and more days went on with no whisper from the disembodied voice, they became hopeful that they would never need to talk to him about why he had been expelled. It was now nearly 4 months since Justin, Nearly Headless Nick, had been found petrified, and nearly everybody seemed to think that the attacker, whomever it was, had retired for good. Peeves had finally gotten bored of "Oh, Potter, you rotter" song. Ernie Macmillan asked Harry quite politely to pass a bucket of leaping toadstools from herbology one day. And in March, several of the mandrakes threw a loud and raucous party in the greenhouse. 3. This made Professor Sprout very happy. The moment they start trying to move into each other's pots, we'll know they're fully mature, she told Harry. Then we'll be able to revive those poor people in the hospital wing. The second years were given something new to think about during the Easter holidays. This time they had come to choose their subjects for the third year, a matter that Hermione at least took very seriously. It could affect your whole future, she told Harry and Ron. They pored over the list of subjects, marking them down with checks. I want to give up potions, said Harry. We can't, said Ron gloomily. We keep all of our old subjects, or I'd have ditched Defense of Dark Arts. But that's very important, said Hermione, shocked. Not the way Lockhart teaches it, said Ron. I haven't learned anything from him except how to not to set pixies loose. Neville Longbottom had been sent letters from all the witches and wizards in his family, all giving him different advice on which to choose. Confused and worried, he sat reading the subject list with his tongue poking out and asking people whether they thought that arithmetic sounded more difficult than the study of ancient ruins. Dean Thomas, who, like Harry, had grown up with muggles, ended up closing his eyes and jamming his wand at the list and picking the subject that he landed on. Hermione took nobody's advice, but signed up for everything. Harry smiled grimly to himself at the thought of what Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia would say if he tried to discuss his career in wizardry with him. Not that he'd get any guidance. Percy Weasley was eager to share his experience. Depends on where you want to go, Harry, he said. It's never too early to start thinking of your future, so I'd recommend divination. People say Muggle studies is a soft option, but I personally think wizards should have a more thorough understanding of the known magical community, particularly if they are thinking of working in close contact with them. Look at my father. He has had to deal with Muggles business all the time. My brother Charlie has always more of an outdoor type, so he went for the care of magical creatures. Play to your strengths, Harry. But the only thing Harry felt that he was really good at was Quidditch. In the end, he chose some new subjects, as Ron, feeling that if he was lousy at them, at least he'd have someone friendly to help him. Gryffindor's next Quidditch match would be against Hufflepuff. Wood was insisting on the team practices every night after dinner, so that Harry barely had time for anything but Quidditch and homework. However, the training sessions were getting better, or at least drier. The evening before Saturday's match, he went up to his dormitory to drop off his broomstick, feeling Gryffindor's chances for the Quidditch Cup had never been better. But his cheerful mood didn't last long. At the top of the stairs of the dormitory, he met Neville Longbottom, who was looking frantic. Harry! I don't know who did it. I just found. Watching Harry fearfully, Neville pushed open the door to the contents of Harry's trunk. He had been thrown everywhere. His cloak lay ripped on the floor, the bedclothes had been pulled off the four posters, and the drawer had been pulled out, and the bedside, the cabinet, and the contents strewn all over the mattress. Harry walked over to the bed, open mouthed, treading on a few loose pages of Travels with Trolls. As he and Neville pulled the blankets back to the loose bed, Ron, Dean, and Seamus came in. What happened, Harry? No idea, said Harry. But Ron, examining Harry's robes, all the pockets were hanging out. Someone's been looking for something, said Ron. Is there anything missing? Harry, something's been looking for something, said Ron. Is there anything missing? Harry started to pick up the things, show them into his trunk, and the only thing he threw in at last was Lockhart's books, and ran. Then he realized it wasn't there. Riddle's diary is gone, he said, in an undertone to Ron. What? Harry jerked his head towards the dormitory door, and Ron followed him out. They hurried down to the Gryffindor common room, with which half empty, and joined Hermione, who was alone reading a book called Ancient Ruins Made Easy. Hermione looked aghast at the news. But only a Gryffindor could have stolen. Nobody knows our password. Exactly, said Harry. They woke up the next to brilliant sunshine and light and the refreshing breeze. Perfect Quidditch conditions, said Wood enthusiastically as the Gryffindor table holding the team's plates with scrambled eggs. Harry, back up there. You need a decent breakfast. Harry had started down the packed Gryffindor table, wondering if he knew the owner of Riddle's diary was right in front of his eyes. Hermione had been urging him to report the robbery, but Harry didn't like the idea. He'd have to tell the teacher all about the diary and how people knew why Hagrid had been expelled 50 years ago. He didn't want to be the one who brought all that up again. As he left the great hall with Ron and Hermione to go collect his Quidditch things, another very serious worry was added to Harry's growing list. He had just set foot in the marble staircase when he heard, yet again, "Kill this time. Let me rip. Tear." He shouted out loud to Ron and Hermione, both in alarm. "The voice!" said Harry, looking over his shoulder. "I just heard that again. Didn't you?" Ron shook his head, wide-eyed. Hermione, however, clapped her hands to her forehead. Harry, I think I've understood something. I've got to go to the library. And she sprinted away up the stairs. What does she understand? Said Harry distractedly, still looking around, trying to see where the voice had come from. Loads more than I do, said Ron, shaking his head. But why? Why she got to go to the library? Because that's what Hermione does, said Ron, shrugging. When in doubt, go to the library. Harry stood irresolute, trying to catch the voice again, but people were now emerging from the great hall behind him, talking loudly, exciting through their front doors, their way to the Quidditch pitch. You'd better get moving, said Ron. It's nearly 11. The match. Harry raced up to Gryffindor Tower, collected his Newman 2000, and joined the large crowd swarming across the grounds. His mind was still on the castle, with the bodies and the voice, and he pulled up his scarlet robes to the locker room. His only comfort was that everyone now was outside to watch the game. The team walked into the field, simultaneous applause. Oliver Wood took off for the warm-up flight around the goalpost. Madam Hooch released the balls. Hufflepuffs, who played in canary yellow, were standing in a huddle, having a last-minute discussion of tactics. Harry was just mounting his broom when Professor McGonagall came half marching, half running across the pitch, carrying an enormous megaphone. Harry's heart dropped to the tone. This match has been cancelled, Professor McGonagall called through a megaphone, addressing the packed stadium. There were boos and shouts. Oliver Wood looked devastated, ran right to Professor McGonagall, getting off his broomstick. But, Professor, he shouted, we've got to play the cup. Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall ignored him and continued to shout through the megaphone. All students are to make their way back to the House of Commons with their heads of houses. We'll give them further information. Quickly as you can, please. They lowered the megaphone, beckoned Harry over to her. Potter, I think you'd better come with me. Wondering how she could have possibly suspected him this time, Harry saw Ron detach himself from the complaining crowd. He came running to them to set off towards the castle. To Harry's surprise, Professor McGonagall did not object. Yes, perhaps you should come too, Weasley. Some of the students were swarming around them, were grinning about the match being cancelled. Others looked worried. Harry and Ron followed Professor McGonagall back up to the school and the marble staircase, but they were taken to anyone's office this time. Oh, this will be a bit of a shock, said Professor McGonagall. In a surprisingly gentle voice, they approached the infirmary. There has been another attack. Another double attack. Harry's insides did a horrible somersault. Professor McGonagall pushed open the door, and Ron entered. Madame Pomfrey was bending over the 6-year girl, long curly hair. Harry recognized her as a Ravenclaw. They accidentally asked for directions to Slytherin in the common room, and then the bed next to him. Hermione! Ron groaned. Hermione lay utterly still, her eyes opened and glassy. They found her near the library, said Professor McGonagall. I don't suppose either of you can explain this. This was on the floor next to them. She was holding a small circular mirror. Harry and Ron shook their heads, both staring at Hermione. I will escort you back to Gryffindor Tower, said Professor McGonagall heavily. I need to address the students in any case. All the students will return to their house Coleman rooms by 6 o'clock in the evening. No students could leave the dormitories after that time. You will be escorted to each lesson by a teacher. No student is to use the bathroom unaccompanied by a teacher. All further Quidditch training and matches will be postponed. There will be no more evening activities. The Gryffindor packed inside the Coleman room, listened to Professor McGonagall in silence. She rolled up the parchment paper from which she had been reading, and said in a somewhat choked voice, I need hardly to say that. I have rarely been so distressed. It is likely that the school will be closed, unless the culprit behind these attacks is caught. I would urge anyone who thinks they might know anything about them to come forward. She climbed somewhat awkwardly out of the portrait hole and the Gryffindors began talking immediately. "That's 2 Gryffindors down, not counting Gryffindor Ghost. 1 Ravenclaw and 1 Hufflepuff," said the Weasley twins, friendly Jordan, counting on his fingers. "Haven't any of these teachers noticed that the Slytherins are all safe? Isn't it obvious all to the staff? It's coming from the Slytherins, the heir of Slytherin, the monster of Slytherin. Why don't they just chuck all the Slytherins out?" he roared, and nods scattered applause. Percy Weasley was sitting in the chair behind Lee, but for once he didn't seem too keen on the views he heard. He was looking pale and stunned. Percy in shock, George and Harry quietly. "That Ravenclaw girl, Penelope Clearwater. She's a prefect. I don't think he thought a monster could dare attack a prefect." But Harry was only half listening. He didn't seem to be able to get rid of the picture of Hermione lying in the hospital bed as though carved out of stone, and if the culprit wasn't caught soon, he was looking at a lifetime back with the Dursleys. Oh, Tom Riddle had turned Hagrid in because he was faced with the prospect of Muggle orphanage if the school closed. Harry now knew exactly how he had felt. "What was he going to do?" said Ron quietly to Harry. "Do you think we suspect Hagrid?" "We've got to go talk to him," said Harry, making up his mind. I can't believe it's him this time, but if he knows something a monster is loose, he'll know how to get inside the Chamber of Secrets, and that's a start." "But McGonagall said we had to stay in our tower unless we're in class." "I think," said Harry more quietly still, "it's time for me to get my dad's old cloak out again." Harry inherited just one thing from his father, a long, silvery invisibility cloak, and it's the only chance of sneaking out of the school to visit Hagrid without anyone noticing about it. They went to bed as usual this time until Neville, Dean, and Seamus had stopped discussing the Chamber of Secrets and finally fallen asleep. They got up, dressed again, and threw on the cloak over themselves. The journey through the dark and deserted castle corridors was enjoyable. Harry, who had wandered the castle at night several times before, had never seen it so crowded after sunset. Teachers and prefects and ghosts were marching the corridors in pairs, staring around for any unusual activity. Their invisibility cloak didn't stop them making a noise. There was a particularly tense moment when Ron stubbed his toe only yards from the spot where Snape stood standing guard. Thankfully, Snape sneezed almost at the same exact moment Ron swore. It was with relief that they reached the oak front doors, eased them open. It was clear, a starry night, and they hurried the lit windows to Hagrid's house and pulled off the cloak when they were right outside the door. Seconds after they knocked, Hagrid flung it open. They found themselves face to face with him, aiming a crossbow at them. Fang and the bloodhound barked loudly behind him. "Oh," he said, lowering his weapon, staring up. "What are you two doing here?" "What's that for?" Harry pointing the crossbow as they stepped inside. Nothing, Hagrid murmured. "I've been inspecting. Doesn't matter. Sit down. I'll make you some tea." He had hardly seemed to know what he was doing. He nearly extinguished the fire, spilling the water from the kettle on it, and they smashed a teapot with a nervous jerk of his massive hand. "Are you okay, Hagrid?" said Harry. "Did you hear about Hermione?" "Oh, I heard all right," said Hagrid, a slight break in his voice. He kept glancing nervously at the windows. He poured them both large boiling water. He had forgotten the tea bags. He was just putting a slab of fruitcake on a plate when there was another hard knock at the door. Hagrid dropped the fruitcake. Harry and Ron exchanged panic-stricken looks, and they threw the invisibility cloak back over them and retreated to the corner. Hagrid checked in that they were hidden. "Good evening, Hagrid." It was Dumbledore. He entered looking deadly serious, and was followed by a second, very odd-looking man. The stranger had rumpled gray hair, an anxious expression, and he was wearing a strange mixture of clothes and pinstripe suit, a scarlet tie, a black cloak, pointed purple boots under his arm, and carried a lime green bowler. "That's my dad's boss," Ron breathed. "Cornelius Fudge, the Ministry of Magic." Harry elbowed Ron to make him shut up. Hagrid had gone pale, sweaty, and he dropped one of his chairs and looked for Dumbledore for Cornelius Fudge. "Bad business, Hagrid," said Fudge, rather clipped tones. "Very bad business. Had to come. 4 attacks on Muggle-borns. Things have gone far enough. Ministry's got to act." "I never," said Hagrid, looking imploringly at Dumbledore. "You know I never. Professor Dumbledore, sir." "I want it understood, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence," said Dumbledore, frowning at Fudge. "Look, Albus," said Fudge uncomfortably, "Hagrid's had a record against him. The Ministry's got to do something. The school governors have been in touch. Yet again, Cornelius, I tell you that taking Hagrid away will not help the slightest," said Dumbledore. His blue eyes were full of fire. Harry had never seen them before. "Look at it from my point of view," said Fudge, fidgeting with the bola. "I'm under a lot of pressure. It's got to be seen that we're doing something. If it turns out it wasn't Hagrid, he'll be back and no more will be said. But I've got to take him. I got to. I wouldn't be doing my duty. Take me?" said Hagrid, who was trembling. "Take me where?" "Oh, for a short stretch only," Fudge said, not meeting Hagrid's eyes. "Not a punishment, Hagrid. More a precaution. If someone else is caught, you'll be let out with a full apology." "Not Azkaban," croaked Hagrid. Before Fudge could answer, there was another loud rap on the door. Dumbledore answered it. It was Harry's turn for the elbow in the ribs. He let out an audible gasp. Mr. Lucius Malfoy strode in to Hagrid's hut, swathed in long black traveling cloaks, smiling a cold and satisfied smile. Fang started to growl. "Already here, Fudge," he said approvingly. "Good, good." What are you doing here?" Hagrid said furiously. "Get out of my house!" "My dear ma'am, please believe me, I have no pleasure at all being inside your, what do you call it?" "This a house?" said Lucius Malfoy, sneering as he looked around the small cabin. "I simply called at the school and was told that the headmaster was here." "And that's exactly what you did with me, and what exactly did you want me, Lucius?" said Dumbledore. He spoke politely, but the fire was still blazing in his blue eyes. "Dreadful thing, Dumbledore," said Malfoy lazily, taking out a long roll of parchment. "But the governors feel that it's time for you to step aside. This is the order of suspension. You'll find 12 signatures on it. I'm afraid we feel that you're losing your touch. How many attacks have there been now? 2 more this afternoon, wasn't it? At this rate, there'll be no Muggle-borns left at Hogwarts, and we all know what an awful loss that would be to the school." "Oh, okay, now, see here, Lucius," said Fudge, looking alarmed. "Dumbledore suspended. No, no, last thing we want just now." "The appointment or suspension of the headmaster is the master of Governor Fudge," said Mr. Malfoy soothingly, "and Dumbledore has failed to stop these attacks." "See here, Malfoy, if Dumbledore can't stop them," Fudge's upper lip was sweating now. "I mean to say, who can?" "That remains to be seen," Mr. Malfoy said with a nasty smile. "But as 12 of us have voted—" Hagrid leapt to his feet, his shaggy black beard grazing the ceiling. "And how many did you have to threaten and blackmail before they agreed, Malfoy, eh?" he roared. "Dear me, dear, you know that temper of yours will lead you into trouble these days, Hagrid," said Mr. Malfoy. "I would advise you to not shout at Azkaban guards like that. They won't like it at all." You can't take Dumbledore," yelled Hagrid, taking Fang, border cower, to whimper in the basket. "Take him away, and the Muggle-borns will stand no chance They'll be killed next. Calm yourself, Hagrid, said Dumbledore sharply. He looked at Lucius Malfoy. If the governors want to remove me, Lucius, I shall, of course, step aside, but stuttered Fudge. No, growled Hagrid. Dumbledore had taken his bright blue eyes off Lucius Malfoy's cold grey eyes. However, said Dumbledore, speaking very slowly and clearly, so that none of them could miss a word, you will find that I will only truly have left the school when there are none loyal to me. You will find that I will help always will be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it. For a second, Harry was almost sure Dumbledore's eyes flickered to the corner where he and Ron were hidden. Admirable sentiment, Malfoy said, howling. We shall all miss your, highly individual way of running things, Albus. Only hope your successors manage to prevent any, killings. He strode the cabinet door, opened it, and bowed Dumbledore out. Fudge, fiddling with his bowler, waited for Hagrid to get ahead of him. But Hagrid stood on his ground, took a deep breath, and said carefully, If anyone wanted to find some stuff, all they had to do was to follow the spiders. That'll lead 'em right. That's what I'm saying. Fudge started him out in amazement. All right, I'm coming, said Hagrid. Pull all this moleskin overcoat. But it was about to follow Fudge through the door and stopped again and loudly said, And someone will need to feed Fang while I'm gone. And the door banged shut. Ron pulled off the invisibility cloak. We're in trouble now, he said hoarsely. You know, Dumbledore, they might as well close the school tonight. There'll be an attack in a day with him gone. Fang started howling and scratching at the closed door.